Good evening, Facebook friends, citizens of America and the planet. Welcome to this edition of the Fireside Chat. And let me ask you, while we're waiting for people to tune in, to please like this conversation and share it. And let's get our friends and neighbors and fellow resistors to come out and share how we are fighting back, how we are standing up, and what we are doing to insist that we have an America and a world that works for all of us. And I want to give a big thank you to everyone for the incredible profusion of inspired action that we've been seeing lately, from the resistance on the pipelines, from the support for Black Lives Matter, the support for the Dakota Access Pipeline resistance. There was a anti-women's rights, anti-abortion demonstration last week, and so many people turned out in opposition that the pro-choice, pro-women's rights demonstrations in many of the large cities far outnumbered the anti-choice demonstrations by a factor of 600, 700, 800% and more. So thank you so much for being a part of that and for standing up at this really critical moment in history. There have been some difficult developments in the last few days and some really important breakthroughs. In some ways, I think people are feeling like we're beginning to see the tide not exactly turn, but we're beginning to see how incredibly powerful. And let's see, I just had a call come in, so if you're calling me, hold off so that we don't break the live stream here. Hold on to your calls and just post your comments. Share your comments and your thoughts about how we're fighting back. Some of the hardship this week was seeing, for example, the deportation of hundreds of our undocumented brothers and sisters. And for example, we saw the deportation of a 35-year-old mother of two who had been brought here at age 14, who's been a very hardworking, contributing member of her community and an upstanding resident, a very hardworking woman named Guadalupe Garcia de Rayos, from Mexico, I believe, who was checking in on an annual basis and who is not considered a priority for deportation. A really beautiful and caring mother and citizen. So at her last reporting a couple days ago, she was actually arrested and deported, and this is the kind of criminal, supposedly, that we are being protected against. Hardworking mothers who are being separated from their children. This is what this just unconscionable deportation policy is about, that pretends to be about criminals. It's true, she did have a strike against her for having possessed documentation, illegal documents, for the mere purpose of getting work in order to support her family. So for having basically possessed illegal documents, identification, invalid identification, she had received a citation, a felony citation, and on that basis was declared a dangerous criminal and priority for deportation. So it's really important that we stand up and support our immigrant brothers and sisters, that we establish sanctuary communities, and that we help support the rights of our immigrant brothers and sisters. there's a whole set of know your rights legal advice. Like when someone comes knocking at your door, unless they have a warrant for your arrest signed specifically by a judge for you, you don't open that door. So there's support and advice out there that we can help circulate. We can establish actual sanctuaries in churches and synagogues where, in fact, ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, cannot come. So these are real sanctuaries, in addition to the non-cooperation sanctuaries that can be established at the town or city or county level. Those won't stop the agents from coming with arrest warrants. To prevent that, you actually need a true sanctuary in the form of a church or a synagogue, some kind of religious institution. So those kinds of things we can be doing to help support our immigrant brothers and sisters. There was another setback in the area of financial regulation. There is a law that was passed as part of the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010 after the Wall Street meltdown. In order to prevent that meltdown from happening again, a law was passed to prevent the payoffs by mining companies or oil companies to governments in order to basically bribe governments into allowing the pillage of the environment and the water supplies and the labor force through these very predatory institutions of mineral extraction and oil and fossil fuel extraction. And there was some protection put into Dodd-Frank by saying that if a company was buying its way in, they had to make that public. Well, guess what? That has just been repealed by an executive order by the Trump administration. Surprise, surprise, it wasn't about working people after all. It's about the oil companies and the CEOs and the bankers and the billionaires. Surprise, surprise. A lot of people are waking up to that right now. So those are two of the setbacks that we experienced this week that we're continuing to fight back against. But let me just mention two very important big steps forward. So one is the resignation of Michael Flynn after some, handful of days in office, 20-some days in office, the shortest ever on record. Michael Flynn, whom was described as sort of right-wing nutty. Actually, those are the words that were used by Colin Powell, a highly regarded member of the defense establishment, describing Michael Flynn in his leaked emails, actually Colin Powell's leaked emails. And Michael Flynn, as you may know, harbored particularly intense Islamophobic points of view, supported some really crazy, what shall we say, false media campaigns. He or his son, I'm not sure which one it was, but he participated in some of this very false kinds of rumor mongering, pretending to be news, essentially, that was extremely harmful. So because Michael Flynn was essentially caught having lied to the Trump administration and to Mike Pence, who then went out on a limb to defend Michael Flynn, he was then dismissed, with all sorts of questions being raised now about what was the nature of his repeated contacts between him and the Trump administration with the Putin government. And I think it is something that should be looked into in a true and honest way to find out what was going on there, and was in fact there some kind of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Now, I say that At the same time, that I think it's important to point out that the blaming of the Russian government is not clearly established, that the so-called report put out by the intelligence agencies was notably lacking in proof and was mostly a set of allegations. So let's take a breath here and let's ensure that we actually have evidence. But having said that, there is a responsibility on the part of the Trump administration prior to their inauguration not to have been colluding. So let's find out. Let's look into this. And at the same time, let's not start World War III before we actually know what went on. And in fact, we do know that this kind of spying goes on between governments all the time. That's not to say it's a good thing, but we have participated in this quite a bit ourselves, including to Russia. And in particular, we have had an enormous hand after the fall of the Soviet Union in establishing and biasing one of their elections, in particular Yeltsin, Boris Yeltsin, who was essentially losing his election to a communist candidate, and the U.S. didn't want that to happen, and networks of Bill Clinton basically went in and salvaged Boris Yeltsin's election and essentially determined the outcome of that election, and also played a very strong hand in the carving up of the public resources after the fall of the Soviet Union and the rise of the oligarchs. So there's been a lot of meddling here all around, which has been very unfortunate, not to mention actually regime change and things of that sort, which we have also had a hand in. And that's not to say that Russia hasn't also, been culpable there too. But let's not pretend that there are guys in white hats here and other guys in black hats and, create World War III in order to duke this out. Having said that, at the same time, it's important to know what is going on and what was the nature of the contacts between the Russian intelligence agencies and Flynn and the Trump administration. The other important success this week, as you probably heard today, was the stopping of the nomination of Andrew Puzder, a CEO of a fast food corporation known for its abuse of workers. And I say this to the Trump supporters in particular, who were looking to Donald Trump to support workers and bring back jobs that are good for workers. But we saw in the appointment of Andrew Puzder where the real priorities of this administration lie. Andrew Puzder was an opponent of living wages. He was an opponent of raising the abysmally low minimum wage. He was an opponent of protections for workers against wage theft. He was an opponent of protections for women workers against sexual harassment on the job. And it's a real tribute to restaurant workers, in fact, that his nomination was stopped in its tracks because they were extremely active and held very big meetings and gatherings and made the voice of worker justice heard loud and clear. So thank you so much to all of the restaurant workers in particular who were standing up for us all and our right to have a cabinet and a Department of Labor that's actually working for us and not for the CEOs who want to exploit workers. And I am just now opening my computer here again, which froze up on me. So hang on, give me one moment. Okay, great. So, again, two really important achievements. Oh, and I'm reminded here by Mel, and I just want to give a big shout out to Mel Figuera, who's doing the engineering on this call as well. So a big thank you to Mel, who basically keeps alive the Green News Network and has been with us since the middle of our presidential campaign. Incredible resource for our campaign, for the Green Party, and for the resistance. Mel reminded me that there was also a DACA student that is deferred action for children of adult immigrants, if I have that right. Essentially, students and young people who've been allowed to remain here even without documents because they're young, because they were brought here when they were too young to have anything to say about it, and because they are either students or working in some other couple of categories. It might be the military, I'm not sure. Anyhow, a young DACA student was actually taken by ICE, the first raid of its kind, and he was just, I think, drawn in to another raid that was going on, and that is said to be a major problem with Donald Trump's, supposed policy of rounding up criminals, because they apparently are taking everyone who is in the building, including students who are here with actual, legally here. This DACA student in particular, and this is extremely worrisome because there are, I believe it's hundreds of thousands of DACA students who are here legally through that program. So this is a really important thing for us all to stand up for and ensure that this that the DACA program is not violated. In fact, it should be expanded. Okay, so let me move into, some other questions have come in. You may have seen this photo when I was in Moscow for a conference held by RT, the Russian television station that unfortunately is one of the only ways that American dissidents can get covered, because our corporate TV here in this country refuses to cover peace advocates, much of the climate movement, the Occupy movement. So the go-to place for dissidents like Chris Hedges, Abby Martin, in prior years, Max Blumenthal, Tom Hartman, many wouldn't even call him a radical, very much inside the Democratic Party, but still too hot for corporate TV to touch. People like David Swanson, an incredible voice for peace. Others, Code Pink, Medea Benjamin, an incredible voice for human rights around the country. We can get covered by RT. Sad as it is to say, we have to turn to Russian television for dissidents to be covered in this country. So many of us were actually in Moscow for their 10-year anniversary conference, which was actually quite an interesting conference, and it's available on the web. And the address for that, if you want to look at that, you can actually see what we said instead of just seeing the pictures that are being used to try to create this myth that, that I was there to collude with the Russian government in some way. Actually, in fact, I was there to challenge the Russian government in the same way that I was there to challenge the U.S. government with a call for a peace initiative, essentially a weapons embargo, and what we called a peace offensive, to actually have a ceasefire and a truce in Syria, but really throughout the Middle East, and to stop sending weapons there. I mean, can you imagine if the U.S. and Russia were to collaborate on a peace offensive in the Middle East? It would be a whole different ballgame. And actually, if you go back a few years, I think it's to 2012, if I'm not mistaken, Russia was actually trying to negotiate a peace deal that, in fact, would have replaced Assad. So it was everything that the U.S. later came to support. The Russians, in fact, were trying to convene a peace agreement on that account as well. Anyhow, so I was there in order to push for this peace accord and this peace offensive. And that's essentially what I said. And you can see that if you go to the website on RT, which is at conference.rt.com. You can actually see that conference. Nothing secret about it. Michael Flynn was also there. There was a spectrum of people. It was dissidents like myself, like Max Blumenthal, like Tom Hartman, Ray McGovern, peace advocate, Rocky Anderson, former mayor of Salt Lake City. A whole bunch of us kind of peace and justice advocates were there. And but it was a diverse group, and Michael Flynn was also there. You can hear what he had to say as well. He had a segment in the day-long conference as well. I was part of a conference with other foreign diplomats, you could say. I wouldn't call myself a diplomat exactly, but I was the one candidate, and there were others who actually had been office holders. So Ken Livingstone, for example, was previously mayor of London, a socialist mayor. Willie Wimmer, who was a foreign policy advisor to, I believe, Gerhard Schroeder. Cyril Svoboda, who was, I believe, a deputy minister of the Czech Republic. We were in a panel together, and all of us were seated at the table of honor. That's how come I happened to be sitting at the same table where Putin made a rather brief appearance. Michael Flynn was also seated at this table. And I will say that I did shake hands with Michael Flynn, but I really didn't have a whole lot to discuss with him. I was there mainly to network on behalf of a peace offensive, and that was definitely not of interest to him. So I really didn't exchange more than a cordial hello with him. And likewise, as far as Mr. Putin went, there was no interpreter at the table, so unfortunately there was no way to talk with him or many of the other people at the table. So just for you to know what actually went on behind that picture, which is being, what shall we say? I think we frightened a lot of people out there by having a very powerful message in this election, and then by raising a lot of money as part of the recount. I think the political establishment is a little worried that the resistance has some power here. So you will see them frequently rear their head in an effort to perform character assassination. But, important to understand it for what it is, and that the issues that they are trying to raise are actually baseless. In fact, I have talked to about 5 reporters now about my time in Moscow and what it meant to sit at the table. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to get any of them to write about it because they're not able to, what should we say, smear me the way that they would like to. They can't make a story about it. So there you go. On to the questions. I think that may have addressed some of the questions about what was going on between me and Michael Flynn, and essentially nothing. Dutsa Gud says, "Hi, Jill Stein. How do we end the might makes right ideology in America? How do we show militarism for what it is to the masses?" That is so important, and this was part of my message in Moscow as well, that essentially Russia was following in the footsteps of the U.S. in these catastrophic wars. We have led the way here now since, 2001 in the invasion of Afghanistan, and onward to spend about between $4 and $6 trillion when you add in the ongoing costs of healthcare. And we've created failed states and mass refugee migrations, and we're eating up more than half of our discretionary budget. And we have nothing to show for it except that it gets worse. So really important to stand up, that might does not make right. Now, I have some breaking news that I'm just hearing that Mel is filling me in on here as we're talking. That Standing Rock is now being raided, a camp at Standing Rock. And this is a Facebook post from LaDonna Allard of the Standing Rock Sioux. And she is saying, please pray for the water protectors. Let the governor know the world is watching. So I would urge you to go to the website when we are done, which will be very soon, in about 10 minutes. We will wrap this up, and we will post the website for you to go to in order for us to weigh in. And I imagine there are going to be some demonstrations tomorrow, and I would urge you to organize one in your town, in your city, if it's not already being organized, and to join one. And we'll post the websites that are, important places to tune into for the latest updates on this. I'll take a couple more questions here. The North Dakota governor just said he intends to force cleanup and evacuation of Standing Rock, including higher ground camps. Any chance we can have your support back at the front lines? And let me just say that, I have an arrest warrant that has not yet been cleared because there is such a shortage of attorneys who can do this work in North Dakota. And I am very actively trying to clear that arrest warrant, because if I go back to Standing Rock now, I'll basically go to jail and I won't be terribly helpful. But I am working hard to try to get that arrest warrant cleared and then help support this movement. And in the meantime, I want to do everything that I can to help everybody else do everything that you can. If you are able-bodied and you can go there to help Standing Rock peacefully, and to bear witness, to help provide support, please do that if you can. This is land that belongs to the Standing Rock Sioux by treaties, which have been violated going back many generations. And even the current process of the U.S. government is being violated here, because the Standing Rock was not allowed to review and approve these plans, which is why they blasted ahead, because the plans are very dangerous. They will contaminate the water supply. There's no question about it. The underground pipeline basically runs right through an aquifer that provides drinking water for the Standing Rock Sioux. So there's no way that this could get approved if the truth was told about it. So it's very important that we stand up and stop this. Okay. Jojo says, thank you for focusing on the actual facts on the ground that have come from the actions of this regime. Paul Martinez says, how can I help with me being in the Deep South? Well, let me just say that the Deep South represents a power structure that has really suppressed the voices of so many people. Simply getting more African Americans and Latinos registered to vote, standing up together in the kind of fights that are going on, like in North Carolina, where the Moral Mondays are standing up for LGBTQ rights, are standing up for women rights and voting rights. There's no end to what we can do, and I will just add that the Green Party is alive and well in many of the states in the South where the Democrats have left this incredible vacuum of organizing. So please check into the Green Party, and Paul, we need your help. Linda Laurie says Pruitt gets voted on tomorrow, right? I already called my Senator Bob Casey and left a message to oppose Pruitt's nomination. That is a good question, and offhand, I am not sure, but we'll try to post about that. Mary Ellen Hall says, we need no more wars, need to work together instead of allowing big business to be our governing body. Exactly, Mary Ellen, that is what the Trump cabinet is all about. Bankers and billionaires. Christopher wants to know, where's the cat? The cat Willie is sleeping upstairs. Maybe he'll wake up soon. He could be here. Mark Doherty says, how do you feel about a universal income, which is essentially a guaranteed minimum to help people stay afloat? Right now, we have many sort of safety net programs, whether it's food assistance or welfare programs or health assistance. So there's an idea which actually comes out of some conservative quarters that instead we should just provide a basic minimum income to everybody, instead of having all these programs that you have to go to, all these different bureaucracies. Instead of just have one program that ensures everyone is kept to a bare minimum standard that will keep people essentially out of poverty. It's a very important idea, and it's an idea whose time has come and needs to be very seriously looked into. There are some countries that are beginning to explore it. There's not a lot of experience with it yet. And let me just say, the alternative to that is ensuring that everyone has a job. And that is another program that we've been very actively pushing, because in my view, we need all hands on deck right now. This is an all hands on deck moment that, in fact, we have a climate crisis as well as an economic crisis. So we need everyone basically to be involved, working good jobs and living wage jobs and beyond, creating that emergency transition to 100% clean renewable energy. All right, let's see. Jason Bertiotti says, it's extremely disappointing that discussing peace with another nation is viewed as a bad thing in the United States. It speaks volumes for the mentality of this nation. And I'll just, conclude here saying, I really got my first taste of activism as a pre-med student. I might have been a med student, but I think it was pre-med. I went with one of my advisors to a meeting between him and some Russians. And what was going on there was that U.S. Healthcare providers were getting together with Russian healthcare providers. This was during the Cold War. And we were saying, this is crazy. This is like maybe the biggest threat to our survival, to health and wellness imaginable, and that is nuclear weapons. And out of that effort to, to allow our humanity to cross borders, person to person, people to people, and to bring that up to our governments, we sort of forced our governments to talk to each other about the things that are no-brainers to us as everyday people. And it's really important. We have to sit down and talk with our adversaries. Talking with our adversaries should not be misconstrued or demeaned as being an act of betrayal. In fact, it's an act of survival. If we don't talk with our adversaries and do conflict resolution and find mutual ways forward on these critical problems, including terrorism, including the climate crisis, including militarism. What if we just agreed, let's cut our militaries by 75%, by 80%, and instead put that money into the emergency that we all have to face in the climate crisis? Because the Russians need to green their economy just like we do. The Chinese are already well on their way. We're spending more on militarism than any other country in the world. In fact, we're spending more than all other countries combined. So, what's wrong with this picture? We need to be fixing the really critical problems that we're facing. And in doing so, we make obsolete this other problem of militarism that has run amok and has become one of the most critical, perhaps the most critical danger that we face between militarism and nuclear weapons, which, remember, the Democrats were expanding just in the same way that Donald Trump has talked about expanding nuclear weapons. The last White House committed us to $1 trillion worth of nuclear expenditures over the coming decades. So that's unfortunately just not compatible with life, nor is the climate crisis. So we got a better way forward, and we are leading that way forward. Thank you so much to all of you for being the change agents that you are. Thank you for the work that you've done that has resulted in the in Michael Flynn departing and in preventing Andrew Puzder from being nominated to essentially assault the Department of Labor, which is what he has in mind, unfortunately. And there are still, I think, some 4, 5, or 6 nominees to go, and we have a lot of power of resistance here. We're just getting started. So keep up the good work, everyone. I'll see you next week, and we'll be posting some websites for you to go to in order to tune into the outrageous struggle going on right now at the Dakota Access Pipeline. Our Indigenous brothers and sisters are standing up for us, for our climate, for a civilization with human rights, and for a water and an air supply that we all depend on. So let's stand with them and stand together. Thank you all so much for creating an America and a world that works for all of us. Thank you, and green news is good news. Let's make it so. Take care. Good night.